Now, this is not the same as when we can start to practice surrender and acceptance. See, when we're talking about when we go from Vaidhi Bhakti to Anuraga, that stage of Anuraga is really one where we really don't put forth any effort. This is when Thakur talks about the dried leaf. Oh, good, come. He gives the illustration that when they have these big feasts outside, they serve a lot of people. They'll use a kind of leaf plate and they'll put all the rice and dal and everything on it, and it'll get sticky and wet, and they'll eat it. And then as time goes by, it's in the sun, everything dries up, and they don't pick up anything because the cows come and eat everything. In those days, it was just kind of all biodegradable things. So it becomes very light after a while, and then a storm comes and it gets blown all over the place. So he says, live in the world like a dry leaf. There's another example of how much Thakur knew of scripture, because this is the exact example that Shushka Parnava that we get from the Ashtavakra Samhita, one of his favorite books. So another example of how he knew scripture and everything. Practicing surrender doesn't mean that we sit outside and wait for the wind to blow us someplace. It doesn't mean that. We practice surrender along with self-effort with regard to the fruits. Now, when we say that everything is the will of God, suppose we like this Chocolito Mariecha, we like this idea, oh, Divine Mother, everything is your will, that you're self-willed, whatever happens, that you're the one who's making things happen. If we want to say that I am the machine and you were the operator, that's one thing. That's something that we can't say. We absolutely cannot say that. Thakur could say that. We can't say that. What we can say is, let me try my best. Let me make the best effort that I have. Let me use my common sense. The question was, how do we decide? Now, we always have to look and analyze, is our decision based on desire, or is it based on what we feel is the proper thing to do? So we have this Shreyas Preyas distinction that we make. Is it something that will be enjoyable and pleasurable, or is it something that through our analysis and elimination of selfish desires and needs, we come up with a plan of action and we do it? Then whatever happens is the will of the Divine Mother, and we accept that, and that's where we practice surrender and acceptance that way. It's not like suppose there's a big exam coming, and the student says that everything is the will of Mother and doesn't study, and then goes and fails, and it was Mother's will. This is not what it means. What it means is that I'll do my best. I'll study as hard as possible, do everything possible. And suppose for some reason there's a question I didn't anticipate, I get a 98 instead of 100, something like that, then with Mother's will, I accept it that way. I don't feel anxious, I don't feel upset. That's how we can practice it that way. This idea that everything is the will of the Divine Mother is something we have to be very cautious about. I'll give an example. There's a conversation that takes place towards the end of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. I don't remember who it was. It was maybe one of the elderly Brahmo devotees who was a little bit critical of this idea of renunciation. And he was saying that is it Mother's will that everyone should renounce the world? Is it Mother's will that everyone should renounce the world? Now, Thakur could say, whatever happens is Mother's will, but he doesn't. He says, oh, and do you know what Mother's will is? He says, do you think that it's Mother's will? And he gives a very strong example. He said that men should live like jackals and dogs in the mating season, running after their mates. You think that's Thakur's will, or that's mother's will. So what he's saying to him is that don't think that when we say everything is the will of the Divine Mother, that we can apply it to ourselves, that means that whatever I do is mother's will. I, who am filled with desires and all of that, I can't say that. I'm not, it's hypocritical. I'm doing everything according to my will, and I say mother's will. So Thakur could say it because Thakur's ego was gone. If he had an ego at all, it was one with the Divine Mother. So he could say that I am the machine and she's the operator, because that unripe I was gone, and he would hear her voice. Sometimes he would look within and see only mother is there. So he could speak in those terms. Otherwise, it's a travesty for us to think like that whatever I do is the will of God. Now, from a very high point of view, we can understand, from a very high point of view, that this is a play, and mother's entered into every being, that this ego is not real. But from our common sense point of view, Thakur says, as long as mother has kept the sense of I in us, we have to take responsibility for our actions. Otherwise, we'll do all sorts of nonsense and things. So how do we decide what to do? First of all, we take responsibility. I am not going to say, oh, whatever I do will be mother's will. I have to say, if I want to act in accordance to the will of God, I have to think, what will be the selfless way? What would be the best way of doing it? How would Thakur recommend? What would please Thakur and mother? What would mother like me to do? In Christian theology, they have this phrase. What do they say? What would Jesus do? This is the way they try to decide what's the best path of action. What would Jesus do? So we can do the same thing. What do the scriptures tell us? What is the selfless thing to do? What is it according to our highest understanding? That this is how we decide what to do. We practice surrender when it comes to the results. And then we say, I tried my best. I did what I thought was best. And God doesn't talk to me to tell me what to do. I have to use my own brain. And if it didn't turn out right, then I accept it and say, well, it wasn't mother's will, that's all. It wasn't my karma, that's all. This is how we practice acceptance. We practice surrender that way. It's not the same as saying that I've reached the point where I don't do any effort, make any effort anymore. That's what happens automatically. That's what happens in a higher state. That's what happens when we reach this anuraga state. And then that's when the Divine Mother herself will remove all of our duties and obligations from us. There's another very important statement that Thakur makes. It's very interesting. It sounds like a non sequitur in the beginning, but he's saying, it may be the same conversation, that everything we do is the will of the Divine Mother. Then Thakur says, if you eat chilies, won't your mouth burn? Now, what's the connection here? What's the connection? Thakur is saying that, yes, everything is the will of the Divine Mother, but I don't think that means that there's no cause and effect, that there's no karmic result. It doesn't mean that. It's not the will of the Divine Mother is not something whimsical. If you eat chili, your mouth will burn. We can say, yes, the Divine Mother, this is her dispensation, that there is cause and effect in the world. So we have to be very clear on this. Swamiji himself is very critical of this people, ordinary people saying, yes, everything is mother's will. We don't know what it means exactly. And especially with regard to what we do, that this is how religious fanatics think, that we know what the will of God is, and it means that we can wipe out everybody else, or convert everybody else. So we have to be very careful about that. So it's a good question. It says surrender is truly possible only when we have no desires left. That's not true. We have our desires, but we should try to put them aside when it comes to making important decisions in our lives. because we have this ability to make a list. One side, what are the desires? How would it fulfill them? On the other side, what is the proper thing to do according to our best understanding? This is why the Yama tells Nachiketa, every second you'll be faced with this option. Do I decide to do Shreyas or do I decide to do Preyas? Do I do the easy thing? Do I do the thing that's pleasant? Or do I do the thing that may not bring any personal enjoyment to me, but I know serves a better purpose and will be better for me in the long run? But I take myself out of the equation. What is the selfless thing to do? What will be best for the family, for society, for the world in general? We try to practice a little bit of selflessness at that time. Then we make the best decision that we can. So how do we make a decision? We use our common sense, that's all. We take the advice of people who know more than we do. And it's true, we're unable to stay without deciding. But the decision doesn't have to be because of desire. There's a beautiful section in the Gita where Arjuna asks this very pertinent question to Sri Krishna. He says, why do we act in such a way that we're not doing the right thing, and we know we're not doing the right thing, and we act even though we don't want to act that way, as if we're being forced to act that way. It's very interesting that he says, by what? Kena ata kena paryuktoyam papam chariti purusha. Why do we do sinful things? Anichanapi, even though we don't want to. Baladiva, as if we're forced to do it. So a very interesting question. Now, Sri Krishna doesn't say, oh, it's the Divine Mother. She says that it's this impure mind. He said this mind that is filled with rajas, kama esha, krodha esha. That because we have anger, because we have greed, because we have desires, all of that, that forces the mind to act in a certain way. We're trying to develop a sattvic mind so that we're not acting and making decisions based on desire. We're making these decisions based on some higher principle, which will be good for everyone and good for ourselves spiritually. So this question of free will, it's not a yes or no question. The more the mind is sunk in tamas and rajas, the less free will we have because we're bound by our desires. The more sattvic the mind is, the freer that mind is to make decisions based on some higher principle. So this question of free will, it's not do we have it or we don't. Everyone has it to more or less of a degree. Small children, sometimes they can't help themselves and we don't even hold them responsible for doing things that just because they have such a tremendous desire. But when we become older, become adults, there's a different standard, even legally, a different standard, because we know the consequences of our action. And we know we do things out of desire that we may be hurting other things. It may not even be legal things that we're doing. So free will is something that is on a scale. It's not either we have it or we don't have it. It's restricted and it's limited by our own understanding, by our own personality and everything. But the freer we are from the rajas and tamas, from desires and passions and everything, the more freedom we have to choose something which will not be simply based on our desires. Okay, so I know Prasanna and Rajagopal can tell me if it was okay. I hope it was okay. That clears up that issue. Okay.
There's a chat message that they thanked you. They're here. They're Zoom.
Yeah, they're watching. I think you on YouTube. Okay. Now I thought that we would look at this chapter 2, the final verses of chapter 2, beginning with the verse 54. This is known as the Stita Prajna section. And I know we've done this, I think, in Pittsburgh as a retreat, but I want to look at it again because it raises so many issues that are pertinent with regard to Sri Ramakrishna and the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. The first thing is that who is the Stita Prajna? Who is the Stita Prajna? In the Vivek Chudamani, there's a long section on Stita Prajna, and it segues directly into a section on the Jivan Mukta. You remember that? That it goes from one right to the other. So we have to assume Stita Prajna, the sage of steady wisdom. Sage of steady wisdom doesn't mean a God-realized person. Now, we may say that we know many people who have all of those qualities, that they're even-minded, they don't get upset, this and that. That's not enough, because the very final verse, Esha Brahmi Stiti Parita, Nainam Prapya Mukiti. Once this is the Brahmi, the stage of being Brahmin. Stitwasam Antakalipi. Even if we're in that state at the final moment, Brahma Nirvana Mrichiti, one gets liberation. So that means the Stita Prajna is a Jivan Mukta. That means Stita Prajna is a Jivan Mukta. That means that somebody who has attained to realization. We're not simply talking about someone who's very peaceful and calm. We're talking about a God-realized soul. Now, this raises issues, because when we read the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, we wonder, where is scope for Jivan Mukti? If we have to, realizing God means going into Samadhi, then and not coming back, we have 21 days. Is there scope? Does he really, is the Jivan Mukta and the Vijnani, are they only for the Ishvara Kotis? It's a legitimate question, because sometimes Sri Ramakrishna, he's not clear on this. Sometimes he'll speak in terms of who can come back from Samadhi, who can have this highest realization, who can have the highest type of Mahabhava and all of these things. And it is only for the Ishvara Kotis and the avatars. At the same time, he'll say, and we've seen it so many times, first realize God, then live in the world. And he's telling that to everyone, householders also, to everyone. So, and he very often talks about the Jivan Mukta. So we know that he believed in that. So we have to conclude that there are ways of attaining realization which don't involve the mind getting merged in Brahman and not being able to come back. We have to conclude that. So if we think of the example of the four friends, those who climb the wall and jump over, the fourth one, when he climbs up, and he may still be on the ladder, but he's high enough to look over and see everything, but doesn't get off the ladder. He can come back down. He'll come back down as a Jivan Mukta, as a free soul. This is, of course, my own speculation, but trying to make sense out of all of these things. So what this means is that we can all be Stita Prajnas. So we don't have to restrict it to those who are Ishvara Kotis or avatars. We can all, and this makes sense because we don't read anywhere in the tradition that there's any limit who can be a Jivan Mukta. Now, to be a Nitya Siddha, ever perfect, that may not be possible for us, or Ishvara Kotis, that may never happen for any of us. But it doesn't matter, and we don't care about any of those things. But we should have this conviction that we can have the highest type of realization, and then we'll continue to live in the world as long as our prarabdha karma is there. This is the idea behind the concept of Jivan Mukti, that attaining to illumination doesn't cancel that particular type of karma, which will determine even the length of our life. That will simply continue to live as a free soul after that. Now, Thakur gives an illustration, which we find elsewhere, a very common illustration, but a good illustration. The potter who's spinning his potter's wheel, and he's shaping the clay into a pot. And when the pot is just the perfect shape, and it's time to take it off of the wheel and put it in the sun to dry, he does that. Now, the whole time that he's doing it, he's spinning the wheel. That means creating karma. He's spinning it, doing action, and it keeps going. As soon as he takes it off, he stops spinning the wheel, but it keeps going by its own momentum. And it can go for a long time because they make them in such a way there's very little friction. Huh? You spin it, it'll go for a long time. So the part which is separate is the Jivan Mukta, and not affected by the wheel, which is the body, but still continues to live. And that means as the wheel is spinning, it means the body is alive. When the wheel stops, then the body falls off. For the free soul, it doesn't make much difference. It doesn't make much difference. Not that they're in samadhi the whole time and don't know that they have a body. That's not the case. Thakur knew he had a body, but he could go back and forth like that. So the Sthita Prajna, this will be a description of somebody who has had the highest type of realization. It doesn't say anything exactly, whether personal God, impersonal absolute, anything like that. Who comes back, how does that person live in the world? How does a God realized soul live in the world? This is the question that we have. It starts out with this, yeah.
So short of Jivan Mukti, in worldly life, is there also an incremental benefit in worldly life of trying to practice?
Okay, now, one of the reasons, there are two reasons. The one is more important than the second. The first reason why we have the Sthita Prajna is Arjuna's question. How do we recognize such a person? That's not the crucial reason for it. Crucial reason is that we're given a blueprint that we want to become God realized soul, then we have to emulate the Sthita Prajna. This again is this aropkara, that we have to take the qualities and use them as part of our spiritual practice. So Shankaracharya says it's for the sake of sadhana, of spiritual practice. If the God realized soul is unmoved in pleasure and pain, then we try to do that. We make it an effort. It's not natural necessarily. We make an effort to be unmoved. If the Sthita Prajna sees the same divine presence in all beings, feels one with all beings, we try to do that. I often refer to a statement that Swami Ashokanandaji made. Somebody asked him, how do we see God in other beings? He said, by seeing God in other beings. There's no trick to it. We simply make an effort. We tell ourselves that I'm not looking at the physical body across from me. I'm seeing the divine presence shining through the eyes of each individual. So this is really why we have this, so that we can try to put into practice all of the qualities that we see here. Now, before we go into it, I want to mention another important point and interesting point, to me at least. That is that there are so many different personality types and so many different paradigms. And this is one type of God realized soul. One type. When Thakur talks about the Vijnani, he says a Vijnani lives in the world with a type of ego, and he breaks it down into two types. One is the ego of knowledge. So for Shankaracharya, he lived in the world with a certain type of ego. For the devotee, it was the ego of devotion. And here, there can be many different types. For Thakur, it meant living in the world like a child of the Divine Mother. For someone else, it can be with a servant attitude, with different types of attitudes like that. When we look at the description, we find how many does Thakur fit this description? No. Does Swamiji fit this description? A little bit. Does Holy Mother?
Yes.
A little bit, not so much. Who is the one of all the direct disciples that matches best with the Sthita Prajna? Swami Sharadananda. Yes, he was the one. You couldn't get him upset. Swamiji tried. Swamiji would get angry with him. He would say, "You fellow, you have the blood of a frog in your veins." Cold-blooded. No, you won't get upset over anything. because Swamiji could scold him right and left. Not that he did it very much, but he would just, nothing would affect him like that. That way he was Tita Prajna. But it doesn't mean that the other types, that they're not equally God-realized souls. Now, Thakur used to talk about 4 types. And where he got this from, we can speculate, because it's found both in Vivek Chudamani and in the Bhagavata Purana. It's found both, that we have these 4 different paradigms. None of them match exactly the Stita Prajna. So we can say that there are at least 5. We have this what we find in Gita. Then he says, we have the Balakavat. This is probably closest to Sri Ramakrishna, that the God-realized soul sometimes will live in the world. He says 2 things, sometimes as a child, or some as a child. So it could be that different types will have one paradigm, or that one person can have different moods and different attitudes. So sometimes as a child, Unmalavat, sometimes in a state of divine madness. We'll see these God-realized souls. We won't know why they behave the way we behave. There's a story that's told of Meher Baba. You've all heard of Meher Baba.
Yes.
Huh? He was a great Sufi saint. Okay.
He used to go to Hafiz all the time. He was a big fan of Hafiz.
Yeah. And they say that he went around, I guess in India, someplace, and to all of the mental institutions, and found many people who were actually God-realized souls who behaved like madmen, and people didn't understand, and they didn't mind. They were equally happy living there as any place else. That he had the ability to be able to discern what is the difference between divine madness and ordinary madness. So Sri Ramakrishna, he was like a child. He was also like a madman. He was felt by many people to have this disease. They tried to cure him of this disease in many different ways. It was mostly because of the Brahmini, Bhairavi Brahmini, that she said, no, this is no ordinary madness, this is divine madness. So this is the second thing. Then we have Jadavat, like an inert thing. So this will refer to the ability of these great souls to go into that state of meditation where they're oblivious to everything in the world. Thakur used to give an example. He said, you know what deep meditation is like? He said, snakes can crawl over your body. You won't be aware of them, they won't be aware of you. Birds can land on your head. You won't know about them, they'll think it's just landing on a stump. So it's completely devoid of any awareness of the external world. This was Thakur. So far Thakur is all 3 of them. Huh? Then what's the 4th? Pishachavat. Pishacha is a type of ghoul. Huh? The particular distinction of Pishachavat is that they don't make any distinction between pure and impure. Now, we find one example in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna that somebody showed up one day. He appeared like a madman, so he had both, Unmadavat and Pishachavat. But he was Purnagyani. They say this someone who has perfect knowledge, full knowledge. And he was one who made no distinction between pure and impure. Now, we read two different versions. One is that Hridoy ran after him, right? And the other was Haladhari, I think. Yeah, we have 2 different, we don't know who it was. But anyhow, one of them ran after him because he very odd. He wore one sneaker. He carried a potted mango plant. But Thakur said when he went into the temple and chanted verses to the Divine Mother, the whole temple shook. So they knew that he was something special about this person. So one of them, Hridoy, is running after him, and he's throwing bricks at him. He didn't want to be recognized. So finally he caught up with him, and he said, "Are you Purnagyani? Are you a perfect knower of Brahman?" And he said, "Yes." And then he said, how does one become like that? And he said, and he pointed, because the Ganges was flowing there, and there was also a ditch water. In India, ditch water means sewage. It can be very raw, very, very nasty, filthy things. But it's water still. They're both water. He said, when you make no distinction between the pure water of the Ganges and this dirty, filthy ditch water, then know that you've achieved this purna jnana, this perfect knowledge, highest type of knowledge. Now, the main practices that Thakur underwent during his tantric sadhana had to do with this. This is one of the purposes that they do all sorts of things so that this idea of grina, this idea that something is detestable, that they get rid of that idea. Unimaginable things, taking the feces of a jackal and putting it on your tongue, all sorts of things like that. Now, if we think about it, what is it? The tongue is composed of the 5 elements. That's also composed of the 5 elements. Some sensation will go, it'll leave some impression on the mind. What's happening? Nothing's happening. I'm not the body, something is touching something else. The mind is doing everything, saying this is pure, this is impure. Bhed buddhi. So in order to get rid of that, they have all of these different types of practices. So this Pishachavat, this will be somebody who's transcended all of that. That will only see this one Brahman manifest everywhere and not make all of these distinctions. This is pure, this is impure. So we have to understand that this Tita Prajna is one paradigm. We shouldn't expect, and we shouldn't use this as the standard to judge whether somebody is a God-realized soul or not. First of all, we shouldn't judge, and we can't really judge. We should take this more as a blueprint for us to follow, that we try to emulate Aropkara. We try to emulate these qualities.
So these 4, the Balak and the Unmad and Pishach and Jara, you could also be these and be Sthita Prajna, nothing bothers you. You're just behaving like a child.
Yeah. Now we saw that Thakur, he embodied all of those 4. There'll be many, in many senses, this Sthita Prajna also. So I don't mean to say that Swamiji wasn't a Sthita Prajna in many, many respects. But the human personality does not get eliminated in the state of God realization. It gets transformed. This is we can understand this by one nice illustration that Thakur gives. He says, suppose there's a string lying on the ground and it has all these curves and everything. It's not just a straight thing. You light it on fire and the whole thing will burn. It'll leave a trail of ash in exactly the same way.
Same shape.
So, and if you don't look very closely, you'll see it'll look like it's at the same string. It'll give the same appearance. But he says you puff on it, whole thing blows away. There's nothing connecting it. There's no substance behind it. That's the human ego, the human personality. So that personality, when Thakur had his realization, Kali Temple, after that, did he not have the same sense of humor? Did he not have the same taste with regard to food? Did he not have the same likes and dislikes, whatever they were? He was the same, but there was no binding power to anything. Not that there was in the beginning. I mean, he's not a good example because he was a different type of case. But if we take this Jivakoti, who has God rules, anyhow, that personality, it's transformed. It's not changed. It's turned to gold. The sword, and the other example, that we take a sword that's steel and can cut somebody's head off, touches the philosopher's stone, and it turns to gold. It looks exactly the same, except a little shiny, but the same form, same shape, everything. But it can't be used to in battle anymore. It's too soft. You can't use it to fight, to injure anybody. So this human personality loses this binding power, but it becomes sweeter. This is why the personality of Thakur is so sweet. he would probably read the Stita Prajna section and say, ah, it's fantastic, but a little dry. He felt that he used to pray to the Divine Mother, Mother, don't make me a dry sadhu. Huh?
But
Let
Swamiji,
me enjoy, let me sing and dance and frisk around a little bit. Huh?
if we say that Thakur was an incarnation and if we believe that,
Hmm.
is that fair to say that, because incarnations, what they do, why they do, they cannot be categorized with the other people, even with the Jivan Kotis or, Sit Prajna, to say that, Thakur did things. Swamiji, Mother, I can say, we can, try to categorize them. But Thakur, would it be fair to do that if we say he's an incarnation?
There's a sense in which we have to make a big distinction. There are certain areas where we have to tell ourselves that doesn't apply to us.
Yes.
Other areas, he did things specifically so they would apply to us. That was the whole purpose of his life. He made the mold so we could pour ourselves into that mold. And he constantly said over and over again, the divine incarnation has a human body and a human mind. So we can relate to them and we can understand even how Holy Mother, Thakur, how they could mourn the death of loved ones. Huh? I have a theory that it's easier for a Jivakoti, for ordinary person, to become a Stita Prajna than for an avatar or for any of them, because they have to have this very human personality. It has to be a little bit of strong covering for them. Otherwise, they'll go right back to where they came from. So they're very, very human. And this is, otherwise, why would they attract us so much? Is the divinity shining through the personality? Look at Swamiji. Look at that personality, so vibrant, so strong. So this is why Thakur said, yes, this is a beautiful ideal, but he liked it a little more with the human element to it. Not binding, but the human element. That one Swami, he asked Swami Turiyananda, before he was Swami Turiyananda, he said, who do you love? He said, I don't love anyone. So what does that mean? Is it Stita Prajna? He says, what a dry fellow. So being God realized soul doesn't mean that the human heart dries up. We shouldn't make that mistake. Okay. Now, the very first, so the first question is, what is the description of the person of steady wisdom? Samadhistha. Now, samadhistha, this is a word that we find used over and over again in the Gospel of Ramakrishna. That was samadhisto, that Thakur is in that state of samadhi. Here it has two meanings. One, we're talking about someone who's established in samadhi. That means that they can go into it at any time. When Swami Brahmananda was asked, Swami Vijay Krishna Goswami happened to meet up with him one time, I think in Vrindavan, and he asked him, you've achieved everything. You've had the highest realization through the grace of Sri Ramakrishna. Why are you doing so much of austerity and meditation? And he said, it's true. I've had the highest experience. I want to become established in it. And when he came back, he was asked that question. Have you become established? And he said, yes. When he came back to participate in the work of the order and everything. So this is one thing, to be established. And the other is to actually be in that state of samadhi. So we read, when it says Shamadhisto in the gospel, it means that Thakur has gone into that state of samadhi. So we'll find some of these verses. We'll talk about that, especially this verse 58, when it says, like the tortoise, when the tortoise pulls in all the limbs. Now there are 4 limbs and there's the head. These will be the 5 senses. So this is prajahati. So this will be this upaharati. This will be this stage preliminary to meditation, when we can withdraw the mind from the senses. That'll be that state of samadhi. Others will be more not in the state of samadhi. How does he behave when he's present to the world, like that? Now, the very first thing we'll bring in this idea of desire. Prajahati yada kaman sarvan partha manogatan atmanyevatmana tushtaha stita prajnas tadochete. Okay, this says that when a person can completely cast away all the desires of the mind, manogata, not just of the mind, those are lodged in the mind, manogata, those are that become kind of part and parcel of us, satisfied in the self alone by the self. So this is an Atmarama state. Then he is said to be one of steady wisdom. Now, Thakur talks very much about desires. So I want to just spend a little time with this question of desires. What does it mean to cast away all desires of the mind? Thakur will make a big distinction. Yesterday, we talked a little bit about Vidyamaya and Avidyamaya, that there are some desires, all desires we can say belong to Maya, but some are Vidyamaya, some are good desires, and some are bad desires. So when it says all desires, Thakur would say that there's some desires that don't fall within the category of desires. We ordinarily say they're desires, but they're so different, and they actually have the power to eliminate other desires. So we won't exactly call them desires. He gives a couple of examples. There's a type of green leafy vegetable called hinche shak. Hinche shak. Now we know if we take, typically we spinach, something like that, other green vegetables, it has this quality of increasing bile in the system. If we take too much, there'll be too much bile. Now this hinche shak, it doesn't create bile. On the other hand, it eliminates bile. It has the power to eliminate it. So this is what he says, that the desire for God is not to be counted as a desire, because desire by definition is something that will pull the mind away from God, because this is something that goes in the other direction. It really should have its own category and a different name. Now, it's not just desire for God realization. We can say desire for holy company, desire for solitude, the desire to go on pilgrimage, any of these things that have a spiritual basis behind them that will be helpful to us in our spiritual life. We want to strengthen these desires, because what is Bakulata if not desire? It's desire that takes us to God realization. We have to have that tremendous desire for God realization. So we shouldn't think that every desire, some people will say that, well, isn't this desire for God even a desire? Do I have to get rid of that? Thakur is very, very clear that don't think of that as a ordinary desire. That falls under a different type of category. So then stita prajna, does the stita prajna have any desires? Now Thakur, again, his case is a little different. It's a little different. He had to keep some small desires in his mind. He forced them on himself. They weren't manogata. They hadn't really entered into him. They were very superficial things. He had to keep them, otherwise the mind would be flying off. His mind was like a helium balloon. If you're not holding on to the string, you let go of it, it goes straight up. It goes straight up. He had to pull it down. So he would keep trifling desires sometimes. And he would eat different foods that he liked to eat. He would like to visit the devotees, he'd like to go to the theater. He went to the circus, all of these things. Why? The museum. He did so many things that were even considered unbecoming for a sadhu. Go to the theater, my goodness. Yeah, it was blasphemous to think. This theater had a terrible reputation. Swamiji said at one time that when I was young, I wouldn't walk on the same side of the street where the theater was. I would cross to the other side. And Latu Maharaj, one time he was going one place to another place, and Thakur said, how long did it take? And he said, it took several hours. He said, several hours? And he said, yes, because all of these different places, there were these the taverns or liquor stores and everything, I had to go around each one and go a different, this way and that way and everything. So it took me so long. So Thakur said, don't take it that far. Yeah. So this theater, which was considered such a horrible place, Thakur enjoyed it. He had such a nice time. The actresses there, people looked down upon them. They weren't, sometimes we hear they were prostitutes. They weren't prostitutes exactly. They had to be a mistress for some wealthy man sometimes because they didn't make enough money. They had no means of livelihood. They couldn't get good marriages. They were looked down upon. But Thakur said, I see the Divine Mother in them. But for other people or other sadhus, this would be unthinkable to do all of these things. So he had to keep these little types of enjoyments and pleasures and everything, because otherwise his mind would go off. Now, for us, when we talk about these desires, we also can make other distinctions. It's not that all desires are bad desires. We have this verse, this Kinyayati verse that everyone is always talking about, that fulfilling a desire is like pouring ghee on a fire. Thakur doesn't say that. Thakur says that there's some desires that are like that. There's some desires, and Holy Mother also, some desires that can be fulfilled and finished with. And there's some desires we have to experiment with. Now, we look at his own lifetime, and he said that 3 desires came into his mind at one time. And this is when Mathur Babu was still alive, that he wanted to taste all of the sweetmeats from the famous sweetmeat shops in Calcutta. So Mathur Babu arranged for it, but he didn't just do it. He would put the sandesh on his tongue and say, oh, okay, so this is what it means. There's a little sensation, nice sensation. It lasts for a few seconds, and then I swallow it. It'll come out the other end the same as all the other food comes out. And how has it helped me in any way? They had a little desire to wear a fancy shawl. In those days, you could get shawls embroidered with gold and silver. They cost a fortune. Mathur Babu spent a lot of money for one of them. Thakur put it on, he walked back and forth, and he said, oh, so this is what it feels like. I always wondered, what does it feel like to wear one of these things? And then he said, but what has it done for me? It increases rajas and nothing else. The minute that idea came into his mind, he threw it off. He started stamping on it and spitting on it. Mathur Babu said, wait, let me take it back. I can return it. And then he wanted to smoke from a very fancy silver hubble bubble. And he got one, and he did it lying down this way and lying down that way. And then he said, what is the same? You're getting the same smoke as with anything else. What is it? Only increases rajas like this. And immediately he threw it away. So there's some types of desires that we're better off trying to fulfill, but we have to recognize them as harmless desires. Otherwise, the whole lifetime we can think, I always wanted to do that. I always had a desire to go skydiving. I had a little desire to do this and that. And we do it one time, we say, okay, done. That desire is finished. And this is what I call bucket list desires. No harm in fulfilling these things. Otherwise, we become dry. And we're always fighting. We always think that we become too puritanical. Now, there are some desires that are pouring ghee on fire, oil on fire, and those we simply say that, no, I have to be very strong. There are different types of personalities. There are people, we have different types of addictions. There's some people who are addicted to power, some people who are addicted to high position, some addicted to alcohol and other things. That they just have to be strong and say, no, I know that I step my foot in that direction and it's a slippery slope and it keeps getting worse and worse and worse. Every time I fulfill this desire, I have a stronger desire. I move up to a higher level. I'm with everybody who owns Cadillacs. And then I say, no, I want to go to that level. Everybody owns Mercedes. I want to go to the level everyone owns a Rolls Royce. For some people, it's like that. Those are the desires that's pouring oil on fire. We have to make a distinction between these things. So some are simple things we want to get rid of. Other things we live with, and we recognize that this comes into the mind. I won't pay much attention to it. So the sage of steady wisdom doesn't have any of these harmful desires, no desires that will disturb the mind. There's another very important verse.
Something this verse, can you expand on Atmajnanananda?
Yeah, so this, we don't desire anything because we have desires because it fulfills something within. Not realizing that the only thing that really fulfills us is within. This external desire is really bringing inner contentment. If we understand that the real contentment is through the self alone. So Atmani in the self, Atmana by the self, that we feel that joy, that contentment. This is an Atmarama state. Then we understand that there's a type of contentment and fulfillment that doesn't require any external thing, which will be temporary. That this is a common source, that flood, it's there all the time. Holy Mother used to say, when she lived in Dakshineswar, she felt as if there were a pitcher of bliss, always full within her heart. People used to say, oh, poor Sharada, she's cooped up there and everything, and she can't get out, and so much hardship. From our point of view, of course, there was hardship. Physically, there was hardship, but deep within, just being in the proximity of Thakur, not that she even saw him all the time. She said, constant flow, steady flow of bliss within. So the real source of joy is within. Now, with regard to desire, I'll jump ahead a little bit because this is a very important verse. This is verse number 70. Apuyamanam achala parishtham samudramapa pravashanti yadvat tadvat kama yam pravashanti sarve sashanti mabnoti na kama kami. When the heart is like a vast ocean, and when these desires flow into the ocean without causing a ripple or a wave, then we've reached that highest stage. If we think of take a river, most of you have seen, if you go to anywhere a little bit close to the Himalayas, even you go to Rishikesh, and you see how fast the water runs, how strong it is. You go a little higher up, you have to have change everywhere. You can't go in for a bath without being swept away. So they'll put change there. You can go in, you can hold on, and you even higher up, and it's just torrential. The closer you get to the ocean, the more that river becomes very slow. When you get to the ocean, you can hardly tell where the river meets the ocean. Sometimes it'll go in, sometimes the ocean water will go back. If you're in Kolkata, there'll be times when the salt water, fish and things can come all the way up. There'll be enough salt in the water because the ocean water flows back. Then it'll go back the other way. So this is the way desires flowed into the Stita Prajna. That they hardly notice it. The ocean is hardly aware. It doesn't say that there are no desires. It says that the desires will flow without causing a ripple or a wave, nothing like that. So we shouldn't think that a desire will leave completely even after the state of God realization. But they lose their power. It's just some old memory almost. Thakur gives another nice example. Somebody has a dream being chased by a tiger, and he wakes up from that dream and realizes, oh, there was no tiger. There's nothing to fear. There's nothing at all. He said, but the heart still palpitates a little bit for a while. Just some little carryover effect. So we still have a little bit of these old samskaras. Some little desire may come into the mind, but the Stita Prajna, he's not affected by any of that. Now, who is the person in trouble? Kama Kami. What does Kama Kami mean? Sometimes it's translated as the one, how do they say it? The one who still has desires.
Lust and greed.
No, this is yeah, no, I like this translation. So it literally means the desirer of desires. Now, this is very important. because we may say that we're trying to eliminate desires. We like desires. So it's not just, sometimes they'll say that kama means someone who is desiring enjoyment. Desiring enjoyment, but it also means that we like to have desires for enjoyment. Kama kami. That we're still craving these enjoyments. Tita Prajna, he's not asking for these desires to come up and doesn't care about them. So when does desire leave? Kama. And kama always has two meanings. Kama means desire in general, lust in particular. There's a story that's told about, what is his name? The minister of Akbar, Birbal. I think it's about him. That his mother was a widow, of course, and led a very pure life and lived just on, they were Brahmin, right? So they're Brahmin widows, so we know that no enjoyments whatsoever, nothing. Had to live on pure vegetarian food, boiled vegetables and rice, very simple type of life. And so Akbar asked the Birbal one time, ask your mother, is she free from lust? And everyone is thinking, my God, what type of question is that? So the mother, she didn't reply. She gave him a box. And so they took it back, they opened it, there was another box inside. And there was another box inside. Finally, the last one, there was ash in there. And they had to decide, what does this whole thing mean? So I don't know the whole story, but anyhow, maybe it was Birbal who said that mother is trying to say that one is free from lust when the body is burnt to ashes. There's an expression, Pure deho, pure chai, tobe sadhuad gun gai. That when can you praise the sadhu as being perfectly virtuous? That means free from lust and greed and pride and anger. When can you do it? When the body has been burnt and the ashes are flying up into the air, then you can do it. So we have to be realistic about things. We have to understand that lust, anger, and greed, that they come along, that's part of the package. There's another interesting conversation. This is one time when I think it was Dr. Sharkar, either him or Dr. Bhaduri, one of them. There were two doctors there. No, it was Dr. Bhaduri. He makes a very beautiful statement that Dr. Sharkar is arguing with Sri Ramakrishna. And he says to him, you have to listen to me. So Thakur, a little bit sharply, said, why should I listen to you? You are kami, lobhi, krodhi. That you're somebody that you're lustful, that you're full of the anger, you're full of greed. So Dr. Sharkar, he got a little bit Obhiman, a little bit upset over that. So the Dr. Bhadri said, no, don't get upset. These are the qualities of a jiva. Yeah. Don't take it personally. This is what it means to be a jiva, to have lust, anger, and greed. So it's true, it's very true. And the sthita prajna, as long as the human body and the human mind are there, these things will be there to a certain extent, but they have no effect on the mind. They have no effect on the mind. They flow into it like the river just gently flows into the ocean, and it doesn't affect the mind at all. So this is the sthita prajna. Thakur's very sophisticated teachings. Holy Mother also about the desires, good desires, bad desires. Once, Swami Arupananda, the Rashpi Hari Maharaj, he was the favorite of Holy Mother. He was her main attendant for many, many years. He said to her mother, when I sit for meditation, all these little desires come up into the mind. You know what she said? Very good. Let them come, let them go. Observe them, realize that you didn't ask them to come. They're not manogata. They don't really, they're not lodged within the heart, that they're simply things that come along with the physical body. They may come from the old samskaras, Don't pay too much attention. Let them come. Let them go. Sometimes we can even do it. We have some curiosity about something. What does this food taste like? Or something. Very often, before we experience something, we think, how fantastic it'll be. Desire is based on this false assumption. We try it and say, that's all that it is. Why was the mind running after it for so long? So some of them we have to try to fulfill and try to experiment with a little bit. Okay, now we have just about 10 minutes. There, of course, so many other things we can talk about with this Stita Prajna and other verses. If we have questions, we'll do the questions. Otherwise, I do have some verses that people asked about, but I'd rather do with face-to-face questions if we have any now. Anybody can be present people here also. Where's Kunal Bhai? Kunal Dada, no questions. He always has questions. You have to unmute. If anybody wants to ask a question, don't forget to unmute.
So, Maharaj,
Yeah.
you answered a question. I'm not asking a question. You answered a question I always had. That I always thought Stita Prajna will be like, this is a totally mental thing. Somebody who is not affected by anything, is always calm and quiet. And
right. Yeah.
even if you are angry at them, he will smile at you and whatever. But today you said that actually not only those 5 types, you said that Stita Prajna as in Gita, but although Balakvat, Pishajvat, Unmadvat, Jadavat, I think you told me that it can be even extended in the sense that any human being, no matter how he looks or he behaves, can be Stita Prajna so long as the desires and other characteristics like anger, etc., do not get attached. I mean, they are no longer. Did I understand that? That means
This okay. They can be Stita Prajnas, but not Jivan Muktas. In order to Stita Prajna, we can emulate the Stita Prajna. We can reach that point where we don't get angry very much and all of that. It doesn't mean we're God realized souls. This becoming a Jivan Mukta is a completely different thing. That all of our karma is burnt. I mean, if something really happens there, so that whatever karma we had that would have led to a new lifetime is gone. So something very radical happens in that through realization. Whether it's through samadhi or just some enlightenment experience, whatever it is, it's something radical. So we have these 3 things: the knots of the heart are undone, all desire, doubts are gone. But this karma, that's a different thing. That there's no rebirth after that. So that's a very radical distinction that we make. Otherwise, there are many people who are Stita Prajnas to a certain extent. That they're just very calm. They may not even be interested in religion or spiritual life or anything. That they just don't react to things very much. But it's helpful. I mean, it can be the result of God realization, but not necessarily. The same thing, we meet some people who are perfectly unselfish.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean they're God realized souls. They're very good people. I wish we were all like that. Very good people. But God realization or self-realization is something radically different and distinct. And there's some metaphysical ramifications to that with regard to merging in Brahman when the body falls, however we understand it. So we want to be Stita Prajnas. We want to emulate these qualities so that the mind is peaceful and calm. We're not at the mercy of the external things. We're not driven by desires. We want to try to live according to this ideal, a very high, beautiful type of ideal.
this is something.
And mostly on the path of knowledge. The devotee, the ideal for the devotee will be a little bit different. There'll be singing and dancing, and also that can be there also. Yeah. So
it is, you said something new. So it is not a prerequisite just before God realization or whichever path they follow, that they would behave like Sthita Prajna.
no,
No.
in some respects, of course, but not in every respect. Because if they're following this path of divine madness, for example, so the Sthita Prajna, so Thakur ready to cut his throat. Do we find anything like that here? There'll be different paradigms for different personality types and different spiritual paths that one is on. This is the only point that I was making. This is a beautiful illustration. If we are of this temperament, they're the perfect template for us. But we shouldn't think that because it doesn't talk about the devotional side, that can also be a blueprint or a template for us. That can be also.
Thank you.
Swamiji,
Yeah.
can I ask you a
Question
question
from
about
here.
the Jivan Muktas?
Yeah.
They are Sthita Prajnas, but will they not react to the societal problems of the society?
Yeah. Now, the Sthita Prajna will be a Jivan Mukta, but a Jivan Mukta won't necessarily be a Sthita Prajna. See, Swamiji was of course, he was not just a Jivan Mukta, he was a Nitya Mukta. He was ever free, Nitya Siddha. But he could get angry.
Yes.
Most of them could. Swami Brahmananda, he could get angry, he could scold, he could weep. Swamiji very often would have tears in his eyes. He had this beautiful personality that way, very soft heart. So the Sthita Prajna will be a Jivan Mukta, but the Jivan Mukta doesn't have to emulate all of these exactly as we read them here. So Thakur, as I say, was more like a child. That means that we were just reading this morning that he wakes up one morning and he sees his legs are a little swollen. So all of a sudden, what to do? Everybody comes, look, I press my leg and there's a dimple there. It doesn't come right back. Press your leg, tell me you have the same thing. Call the doctor, what should I do? We don't find that as Sthita Prajna. Does that mean Thakur is not a perfect soul? So it just means they're different personality types, that's all.
Could it also mean, Swamiji, that it all happens, that they all display this, but it's not there in their mind, imprinted or stayed there forever. They know that's happening to mind and body at all point and just behave that way, but they don't let that affect their inner self.
I don't know how you explain it. I think that everyone has a personality. If even the avatar born with the human mind has a certain type of personality, and this divinity shines through that personality. So there'll be personality traits but they won't have any binding effect. That's all.
So the avatar acts like a human. It's like saying he's acting, but he knows all along that he's acting.
No, it doesn't mean that. When Thakur, how many times he said Ramakrishna wept for Sita? Was he pretending to weep? No. Was Thakur pretending to weep when Akshay died, his nephew? The Holy Mother, how many times she wept when the direct disciples passed away? She wasn't pretending. It was real. They can feel emotions far more than we can, but there won't be any selfish element to it. Their love is so pure that, and their hearts are so tender that they'll also feel emotions. This Sthita Prajna is a little bit on the unemotional side, or at least that's not stressed, that side. Different personality type. So
This is not what Swamiji meant by stone-hearted.
no, a little dry though. A little bit, but actually beautiful. If we meet someone like this, we'll be so impressed that we won't know what to do. It's actually a beautiful paradigm. I'm joking when I say a little dry, compared to Thakur a little bit. So we're ready for the kids, I think. Let me just mention one other thing, that there's a phrase that comes here a couple of times, similar things. This idea of prasada and this prasada cetasa. This idea of really we can understand what Thakur means by the grace of the mind. The grace of the mind, he says, he quotes a song, the Vaishnava song, that you can have grace of the Guru, the grace of the Vaishnava, the grace of the Lord. Without the grace of the mind, you don't have anything. So the grace of the mind means that the mind is cooperating with us. The mind is quiet, the mind is calm, the mind is clear. Prasada also means keep clear, translucent. That we look into that mind and we see that infinite self within. There are several verses about that, and this is one of the characteristics of the Sthita Prajna. Sthita Prajna has the grace of the mind, very pure, calm, translucent type of mind. So is it time to stop? Susmita?
I just couldn't.
Huh? Susmita?
Yes, Maharaj.
Is it time to begin the kids'